So there was a recent announcement that the Resident Evil movie series is receiving a reboot by director Johan Roberts, famous for Oscar-worthy classics as 47 Meters Down, The Strangers, Pray at Night, Forest of the Damned, and okay, they're not exactly the strongest movies around, but they can't be much worse than this. Supposedly, the movies are going to be a lot closer to the games than the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, and considering the games are themselves already an homage to B-movie schlock, Roberts actually sounds like the perfect guy to film this kind of movie, especially since he's said to be a fan of the games himself. But then Roberts says, "With this movie, I really wanted to go back to the original first two games, and recreate the terrifying visceral experience I had when I first played them, whilst at the same time telling a grounded human story about a small dying American town that feels both relatable and relevant to today's audience." Silent Hill. You're talking about Silent Hill. That already got 2 movies. Grounded? Relatable? And what bothers me even further is that this is supposed to be an adaptation of the first 2 games. Like, both of them. At the same time. They already have a cast for Chris, Jill, Leon, Claire, Wesker, even Birkin. How the hell are they gonna cram 2 wildly different and convoluted stories in one movie with this large cast of characters? Okay, you can probably tell that I already don't like this idea. But I gotta stress here that I don't claim to be a master filmmaker or anything. I just want to throw some darts at a board and tell you guys that this is how I would do it. My idea for a Resident Evil movie will only directly adapt the story of the first game, which, if you've played it, is absolutely bonkers as it is.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a
Jill sandwich.
You're right.
A few zombies eat some folks in Raccoon City, and the super SWAT team known as STARS gets sent to the mountains where they came from, finding a mysterious mansion filled with death traps, secrets, and crazy monsters, even more deadly than the zombies that they were sent to find to begin with. So the player, choosing either Chris or Jill as their main hero, must survive the mansion's horrors and uncover its secrets to put a stop to this threat once and for all, hopefully saving their lost comrades in the process. Turns out the mansion was made by a pharmaceutical company known as Umbrella, who secretly make bioweapons for profit and global domination. The mansion is a front for their experiments, and STARS was lured to it as a way to test their abilities against the monsters and traps, as revealed by STARS captain Albert Wesker, who turns out to be an Umbrella double agent and a traitor, who also reveals he's going to steal the combat data for himself and screw Umbrella over. And then he unleashes a big monster on the heroes.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
He dies, but not really. The heroes kill the big monster, the mansion self-destructs, but they escape with Now, while this basic plot, like I said for the Mario movie, is going to be unchanged, events and other aspects will be altered to fit what I'd expect to be a 2-hour movie. This next bit might be kind of controversial. I pointed out that the series is known for being incredibly cheesy and nonsensical, and it's particularly noticeable with the first game.
There are terrible demons. Ouch!
No! Don't go!
Making a horror movie that takes itself 100% seriously with this kind of setting and story is kind of difficult. So I propose that the first film should be an action horror comedy. Come on, hear me out. No, I'm not saying that Resident Evil should be a comedy movie or anything. Ideally, it should still be an actually terrifying, visceral experience with characters whose fates you actually care about. But it's also set in a cartoony death trap mansion with Halloween monsters and mad scientist supervillains, and all the characters are known for cheesy one-liners.
Give me a chance to play nice guy.
So the comedic elements of the movie would come from irony and self-awareness.
I have this. I like the buddy system we have here.
I see.
Characters will be genre-savvy about zombie movies and lament how some of the methods they've seen in these movies don't work quite as well as they'd expect. Barry will be making puns and dad jokes in line with some of the things he says in the original game. Chris will be constantly annoyed with the crazy Indiana Jones style puzzles. Wesker will remark that Spencer is an absolute nut job, etc, etc.
Become a god.
Ideally though, none of these things will make any of the tension of the horrific scenes in the story disappear completely. They'll only serve to help the audience suspend their disbelief a little bit.
What do you know? Haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief?
By showing that the characters are also aware of how ridiculous it is, becoming invested in their attempt to add levity to the grimness of the mansion, and becoming legitimately worried for their safety. Becoming scared when they become scared. I also want to go over some of the really glaring plot holes the original game story had. When the player chooses a character and begins the game, the STARS team is chased by dogs into the mansion, where they end up being separated from a comrade, who it is being dependent on whether or not the player is Chris or Jill.
Hey, Wesker, where's Chris?
Barry. Where's Barry?
The problem is, we don't see this separation happening, how it happened, and what the hell that missing person has been doing all this time. Not to mention, even more of your team goes missing, including the other playable character. Eventually, you find the other playable character imprisoned in a cell really deep within the mansion's lab, but there's no explanation as to how the hell they got there. Since Wesker is the only person who could have done it, but if the whole point was to collect combat data, why did you keep them in a cell all this time, sitting around safe from monsters, not doing anything? Second major plot hole is, when the player chooses Jill, Rebecca never shows up. Like she never even existed. Similarly, in Chris's playthrough, Barry never shows up. But it's worse in Chris's case, because Barry's disappearance is what set off Chris's initial investigation, and like Barry says,
Chris is our old partner, you know.
So Chris goes through the whole game not knowing what happened to Barry, and doesn't even acknowledge him, at all! Now on to the main cast. So we got our main heroes, Chris and Jill, who are the main characters we focus on at varying viewpoints, with the supporting characters of Rebecca, Barry, and of course, Wesker, the bad guy trader man who goes on to attempt complete
global saturation.
Since the first game is, well, a mid-90s video game, there's not much chemistry between the characters. And even up to now, none of these characters have particularly defined personalities beyond subtle gameplay quirks and some offhand lines. Chris and Jill are both confident action hero types that know how to pull off snarky one-liners when they feel like it. But at least in Resident Evil 1, it's implied Chris is a lot more gung-ho, cocky, and lacking in finesse, with his small inventory space, changing his aim depending on whether or not he's fighting a boss, being unable to lockpick doors, and losing his gun at the start of the game. Basically, I'd be playing up this barely present reckless attitude that he never shows in other games. He's not an idiot. He's a highly trained Special Forces officer and a clever investigator after all, but it's clear that this reckless attitude is going to bite him. So the sheer insanity of the mansion incident will really test him. Jill is a marked contrast to Chris, and I'd be playing up the no-nonsense personality she shows in the remake of Resident Evil 3.
We can use this to stay in contact.
I know what a radio is.
It's clear she shows a strong camaraderie with her teammates, particularly Chris and Barry, but in times of crisis, she is not going to take their crap, borderline exaggerating the traits she's shown in the first game, with the large inventory space experience with lockpicking and she fancies herself prepared for almost any situation, but finds that she can't prepare herself for the horrors of the mansion and its monsters that defy common sense. It's important to make sure that Chris and Jill have a strong chemistry from the beginning, so that the audience cares about their friendship, because, as in the original game, they'll be separated from each other for the majority of the story. So Chris and Jill aren't too changed from their original counterparts, mostly just emphasizing the personality traits that were already there. It's the supporting characters that I plan to change the most, ranging from relatively small to really significant. Barryburton is Chris's old partner and Jill's companion for most of the original game, as well as the unintended comic relief for lines such as,
What is? Hope this is not electricity.
You, the master of unlocking,
Take it with you. Jill Sandwich.
I'd rather play Resident Evil 6 again than not have Barry say his iconic lines in some capacity. With him being the oldest STARS member and a family man with a strange sense of humor, I think it's best to take this to its logical conclusion and make him the team dad. Regarding his reluctant cooperation with Wesker, a lot of the actions he performs throughout the original game don't really make a huge amount of sense until the end. And even then, the story never amounted to much in the grand scheme of things. So I think for the sake of simplifying it, it'd be best to cut the whole Barry's a traitor subplot altogether. In this concept, Barry is a supportive, goofy dude all the way through, providing much of the levity through the story's darkest moments. Wesker is the bad guy. He wears sunglasses at night, shows up at the most suspicious times, and he's British.
Fire when ready.
At this point, everyone knows he's the Resident Evil villain. That, and he's never shown a particularly close relationship towards any of the other STARS members. He's always rather cold to everybody, so it makes sense that the other characters probably don't want to indulge in befriending him beyond basic professionalism. So when it comes to his role in the story, I'm not even gonna try to make it a secret that he's up to something. Kinda like I do, however, want to change some of the motivations behind his actions to seem more pragmatic and, well, sensical. His whole motivation in the first game is to collect combat data based on how well the STARS members do against the T-Virus monsters in the mansion, as well as erasing all evidence of his cooperation with Umbrella. So manipulating Barry really doesn't make a lick of sense, since all that ever did was add another witness to Wesker's crimes and a bullet to the shoulder. I also want to cut out the whole capturing Chris or Jill sequence. The final major supporting character is probably the one receiving the most changes to their role and personality. Rebecca. She's been at the mansion for almost 2 nights, longer than anybody in the entire cast, so despite being the most inexperienced STARS member, she's survived all this time. Her role in the original game was kinda lame, since it mostly consisted of but the remake and its prequel, Zero, add a lot more depth to the character's skills in medicine, investigation, and shooting things. My main problem with her in the remake is that she's not quite as awesome as she really should be. While I don't necessarily want to adapt Zero since no. I do want to allude to the implication that the game happened in some capacity by having Rebecca become even more crazy prepared for the mansion's insanities than Jill is. Basically, her movie self is playing on New Game Plus. She also provides a bit of exposition by revealing to Chris some clues on the mansion she found, as well as explaining what happened to Bravo Team. The newbie, Rebecca, is, ironically, the veteran mentor character to Chris Redfield, the actual military veteran who just keeps getting lost and can't wrap his head around the chaos that is the mansion. Not that I blame him. There's one more character I want to talk about. A monster created for the remake, who I think is one of the strongest additions to not only the first game, but to the entire series lore. Lisa Trevor. Among the zombies, lizardmen, dogs, and killer crows, Lisa stands out as being unlike any of the other monsters, and would serve as a retroactive foreshadowing to characters like Mr. X and Nemesis in their pursuit of the player and showing up at the most inopportune times. She is also one of the few monsters with a developed, tear-jerking backstory, being a failed Umbrella experiment who has been searching for her missing mother for years, not realizing she died a long time ago. She'll play a bigger role in my movie concept than she ever did in the game. Since the plot of the movie is essentially the plot of the game, I'm not going to go over the whole plot of what I imagine like the last video about Mario. Instead, I just want to focus on individual elements of the story that I think would best suit a 2-hour feature. Painting Zero's opening in very broad strokes, we have a prologue scene featuring Rebecca and Bravo team of STARS, encountering zombies and Cerberus dogs in the forest, all horror-like, and ending with a cut to title, as Rebecca stares at the feasting zombies in horror. Next sequence, we contrast the first team's failure and showing Star's effectiveness and heroism by having Alpha Team defuse a hostage situation in a typical Hollywood action hero manner. Although the perps in this regard are actually ex-Umbrella employees ranting about how their company is evil, they end up looking like big pharma conspiracy theorists and are promptly dealt with. Shortly after a bit of bonding between Chris, Jill, Barry, and Brad, Wesker notifies the Alpha Team that they've lost contact with Bravo Team in the Arklay Mountains. Cue basically what happens in the intro cutscene. This time we actually see how Chris gets separated from Jill and the rest of the team. Let's say he somehow found himself in one of the side entrances of the mansion. The gist of most of the story is Jill and Barry trying to find Wesker, their comrades, and uncover the secrets of the mansion, while encountering several monsters and traps along the way. Meanwhile, Chris is struggling on his own on the other side of the mansion, trying to survive, and bumps into an extremely badass Rebecca. As a way to add even more tension to Chris and Rebecca's story, Rebecca is chased by Lisa Trevor, and she and Chris have to outwit and hide from her whenever she shows up. Rebecca at this point doesn't know why this invincible monster is chasing her specifically. While the games aren't known for complex character development, Chris and Jill each have a particular flaw that leaves them not quite as good as they could be in their handling of events. Jill is always looking for a rigid, methodical approach as she waits and sees, which is contrasted by Barry's blunt thinking and willingness to take things on gut instinct, and so Barry ends up handling the mansion better than Jill at first. Meanwhile, Chris's approach is too gung-ho compared to Barry's, and he's constantly finding himself in difficult encounters, running for his life because he's running low on ammo and doesn't bother to prepare himself, in contrast to Rebecca, who is insanely prepared and completes most encounters for him. So the subtle development comes from Chris and Jill overcoming their respective flaws in thinking to become more adaptable, with Chris eventually heeding Rebecca's advice and preparation, and Jill learning to be more straightforward in her thinking as she heeds Barry's effective brute force methods. Unlike the game, I want this movie to actually have Chris and Jill's parties cross paths. A good way to do this is to have Barry get bit by the yawn, leading to Jill needing to save him by getting the serum. At the same time, Rebecca gets attacked by the Plant 42, leading to Chris needing to grab a flame grenade launcher from an item box. They then turn out to be heading the same place and bump into each other. At this point, Chris has learned medicinal techniques from Rebecca and knows how to use the serum, while Jill is better with a grenade launcher than he is, so they swap items and go on to save each other's partner. The four main heroes have discovered all they need to find the underground lab, and they find out about Lisa Trevor's past. Turns out Rebecca has a coincidentally striking resemblance to Lisa's mother. They then find the underground lab and evidence of Wesker's ties to Umbrella. Cue Wesker explaining his plan, activating the Tyrant. The heroes try to shoot Wesker down before he does, but Wesker's a fast shot and manages to shoot both Rebecca and Barry, before Chris and Jill mortally wound him. But Wesker's bloodied body manages to activate the Tyrant before he dies. And the heroes are at an impasse with the monster, as Rebecca and Barry both lie wounded. Okay, here's where I'm just having fun. Lisa and the Tyrant really badly wound each other, but Lisa is dealt a mortal blow, while the Tyrant is left open for Chris and Jill to unleash everything they've got on it. The seemingly dead Tyrant lies still, while a dying Lisa cries. Rebecca leans over in pity, dropping a little pendant of Lisa and her family in the tragic monster's hands. A bit anticlimactic for this video, but we basically know what happens after this. The only difference is, both Rebecca and Barry are here this time. Chris, Jill, Rebecca, and Barry escape with their lives, but forever traumatized by the events of the mansion incident.